Tonight, I'm Brian Ross Investigates. MS-13 strikes again. Murder on a New York City subway platform. A crime used by the president to justify building a border wall.
But until we secure our border, they're going to keep streaming right back in.
But the dire warnings are met with skepticism and mockery.
Did you know Mexicans are scary and we need to build a wall to keep them away? Did you know this, Guillermo?
No, I didn't.
What's the real story about MS-13? Plus, inside an undercover sting.
I knew pretty quickly that this was a ruse.
A cyber watchdog group turns the tables on someone they say was trying to spy on them.
I'm totally convinced that he was spying on me.
Plus, our shout-out for an investigation that went viral about the startling differences between two Louisiana high schools, one with mostly white students, the other with mostly African-American students.
Don't want their kids going to the same school as black students because of their, quote, moral character.
And now a federal judge is demanding to know why. From the Law and Crime Network studios in New York City, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening and welcome. We begin tonight with a hard look at the brutal street gang MS-13 and the outsized role it is now playing in American politics, being used once again this week by President Trump as a key reason for a wall across the southern border. For the president, the timing was perfect as MS-13 struck once again this week on a New York City subway platform, the murder of a rival gang member in broad daylight. A cell phone video of the entire brazen incident quickly went viral, played again and again on TV news across the country.
Just yesterday, an MS-13 gang member was taken into custody for a fatal shooting on a subway platform in New York City. We are removing these gang members by the thousands, but until we secure our border, they're going to keep streaming right back in.
But even with the graphic video, the president's warning about MS-13 was met with widespread criticism and mockery.
They had a lot of exciting new ideas. For instance, did you know Mexicans are scary and we need to build a wall to keep them away? Did you know this, Guillermo?
No, I didn't.
Trump talked more about fighting aliens tonight than Sigourney Weaver. It was...
So the question tonight, why isn't the president being taken seriously about the MS-13 gang as a threat to public safety? Does his record of exaggeration and repeated falsehoods include his claims about the threat of MS-13? Does the gang's violence really justify a wall across the border? Joining us tonight is Mark Morgan, a veteran FBI agent who ran the Border Patrol under President Obama and then was actually fired by President Trump. Even so, Mr. Morgan has supported the president's call for a wall across the border. Mr. Morgan, thank you for being here tonight. Let me begin by asking you about the president's claim that the wall will keep MS-13 gang members out of the U.S. That's not true, is it?
No, it's absolutely true, Brian. Look, when I was in the FBI, I led an MS-13 gang task force. So I don't know about other areas where people are claiming the president is using hyperbole or exaggerating. But when he talks about the MS-13, he's not. And I know he's not because I lived it and I worked it. MS-13 is the most violent, prolific, transnational gang this country's ever seen. And it is in countless cities throughout this country. And it has its origins in Central America. They make their way through. They illegally enter the country. And again, they're in countless cities in this country. It's not hyperbole, Brian, it's fact.
Well, that's true. Certainly there's a threat from the gang, and they are extremely brutal, as we've seen across the country. Mr. Trump said they operate in some 20 states. But the question is the wall the answer? Is that the way to control MS-13?
It's a pretty darn good start. And again, when we talked about the wall, let's make sure, and the president's made this clear now several times, it's a physical barrier. It's steel slats so the Border Patrol can see through it. It's not like the Wall of China. It's not concrete. And here's what it does. Again, the wall in itself is not the answer. It's a significant part of that multi-layered approach of infrastructure, technology, and personnel. And when you have that multi-layered strategy in the right areas, it absolutely is effective. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that avenue away from MS-13 to just go back and forth the borders illegally. It's going to force them to go to the ports where we are offensive in nature, and we stand a heck of a lot better chance of interdicting them. When I led the MS-13 gang task force, we would catch them on wires, Brian, and they would laugh because how easy it was to go back and forth the United States. In New York, the individual that the gang members caught, he's come back and forth several times. It's easy for them. That wall is going to absolutely increase the Border Patrol's ability to interdict them.
But Mr. Morgan, I've talked to a lot of your former colleagues at the FBI have been working against MS-13 in the last few years. They say they come in mostly through the ports of entry. They use all kinds of tricks at the border to get in.
So Brian, I'm glad you asked that.
What does the wall do about that?
So people are saying the same thing about drugs, that the ports of entry, more drugs are interdicted. Remember, we have 2,000 miles of border. Only 654 of them have any type of physical barrier at all. So over 1,000 miles is still wide open. The true issue is we are not stopping half of what's getting through. So we don't know what's getting through, but I can tell you they're getting through because the border is so porous. They're going through the ports and they're going in between the ports.
But you would agree, would you, it's not just the wall that's going to make the border more secure. There's much more high technology that's needed.
Brian, absolutely. And if you ask any expert, they're going to tell you technology is absolutely an integral part of that, as well as personnel. The wall by itself will not solve the problem. It will not. You have to have the wall as part of infrastructure and technology and personnel.
Mark Morgan, thank you very much for joining us. Featuring the work of a cyber watchdog group at the University of Toronto called Citizen Lab. The group told us how they had discovered Saudi Arabia was apparently using some sophisticated spyware made by a company in Israel to track the phones of Saudi dissidents, including friends of the murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Then, the day after our report, a strange twist, what the New York Times called a case of a bungling spy who apparently was trying to trick the Citizen Lab into revealing sensitive information about how they work. Here's an inside look with their video about how it went down. The setting, a five-star hotel in New York City. The host, a man using the name Michel Lambert, supposedly from a French consulting company. The target, John Scott-Railton of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, a watchdog group which has been investigating how the Saudi government and others have been cracking down on dissidents. In the phone call to set up the luncheon meeting, conducted in French, Scott-Railton says he already knew something wasn't right. The questions were strange. He thought someone was trying to spy on him.
I knew pretty quickly that this was a ruse.
But Railton decided to show up at the Peninsula Hotel for the luncheon meeting anyway and see if he could turn the tables on the man he thought was trying to spy on him.
Since I've been working with reporters from the Associated Press since December on this case, we decide it's time to move towards a sting. And we're going to see if we can catch them red-handed trying to run this operation.
And so that you sat down for lunch?
So we sit down for lunch.
Scott-Railton says his host steered the conversation toward an Israeli company called NSO, which his group believes was helping the Saudis to track dissidents. So they were trying to gather information from you about the work that Citizens Lab does?
That's right.
With a focus on the NSO group?
That's right.
The Israeli company?
That's right.
Scott-Railton says he was recording Michel, and he says he's sure Michel was recording him.
Can I see your pen for a second? All right. So usually when you talk to a person, you rarely aim the cap of your pen at them for extended periods of time. I could tell that the pen that he was using had a hole in the top, and I felt pretty certain during that conversation that there was either a camera lurking in there or a microphone.
But Scott-Railton had his own cameras and watched as the reporter and the photographer from the Associated Press moved in to confront Michel.
You don't have to speak with you.
Excuse me?
I don't have to speak with you.
Well, actually, I think you'll want to, because my colleague was visiting your company this morning, and, you know, it's very strange. She says it doesn't exist.
The AP reporter, Raphael Satter, tells the man his colleagues in Paris could not find the company he claims to work for.
Number 77, Avenue Parmentier. It's strange, your company is not there. We can't really figure it out. Could you...
Please, why are you taking... You get permission for this?
Sure, we are. Can we ask who you're working for?
He's very unhappy. As we follow him, and the AP reporter asks him some pointed questions about who he works for and why his company doesn't seem to exist.
Fantastic.
Finally, after making the rounds, he finds an open door towards the back of the restaurant and scoots in it. And that's the last we saw of Michel.
So who is Michel?
Well, Michel, according to reporting that came out yesterday from first Israeli reporters and then the New York Times, is actually named Aharon Almog Asulin. And he's somebody with a background in as an officer.
So he was spying on you, you're convinced?
I'm totally convinced that he was spying on me. We were put in a position where we had to take some kind of special action in this case. And I think, we did what we had to do. I would hope, though, that this is read also as evidence of something bigger. For years, our work has been based around showing that there is a commercial spyware industry that's out of control. And that industry, although it claims that its products are being sold to tackle criminality and terrorism, which is undoubtedly true, I'm not arguing that police, with proper accountability, shouldn't have the ability and shouldn't be properly technically empowered to conduct their work. But what concerns me is an industry that will sell things to states that have a history of lack of accountability and bad behavior.
But clearly you're doing something somebody wants to stop.
I think that's right. And to me, that's evidence that we're doing good and important work, and it renews our motivation to continue our investigations.
A spokesperson for NSO, the Israeli company, declined our request for a company official to appear on our program tonight. The spokesperson denied the company, NSO, played any role whatsoever in trying to spy on Citizen Lab. And while all that was going on with Citizen Lab, Reuters broke a major story about another case of alleged spying of journalists and human rights advocates. Reuters learned that former U.S. intelligence officials had actually gone to work for the United Arab Emirates. What at first was supposed to be a program to detect terrorists seems to have turned into an effort to target journalists and dissidents using techniques known to the former American spy officials. Here's some of the Reuters video posted with their story.
An investigation by Reuters found the group helped the UAE spy on targets, such as rival governments and militants, in an operation codenamed Project Raven. It also targeted human rights activists who were critical of the UAE's monarchy. The UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the NSA both declined to comment. But hackers Reuters spoke to say Project Raven went even further, putting some Americans under surveillance.
Joining me now is one of the two Reuters reporters who broke this major investigation, Joel Shuckman. Joel, thank you very much for being here. This is quite a story. How'd you get onto it?
It was kind of crazy. It was like one of those things. I think I heard about it from somebody when I was at a bar, and it was kind of just like one of those tall tales you hear. Somebody was telling me that he had heard people were like leaving the United Arab Emirates and leaving their jobs because they were being asked to spy on other Americans, and it just kind of sounded like something that was too crazy to be true. And it's one of those things that you would never be able to report secondhand, but relatively quickly, we were able to actually find the people that this happened to, and they shared their stories with us, and they had documents to substantiate their claims, and it was one of those things you kind of like couldn't make up almost,
You had one of the former American NSA officials actually speak to you on the record, Laurie Stroud. How did you get her to talk? What did she say?
Yeah, so her story was incredible. I mean, her story was that she had been an elite hacker for the NSA in Hawaii, targeting foreign governments like China for the U.S. And, she got, after a few career setbacks, she had got this, what she saw as being a great opportunity to work for a intelligence contractor in Abu Dhabi. And she, didn't necessarily ask like that many questions before she arrived there, which is kind of not that uncommon among intelligence contractors who often aren't really fully clued into what they're going to be doing until they're on the job. And once she arrived, she found out that the mandate was quite broad, that she was going to be working directly for an Emirati spy agency, spying on, terrorism suspects, but also human rights activists and journalists and, anybody who was kind of like a political dissident who spoke poorly of this monarchy. And, she was pretty okay with that for a while, for several years, and she did really well on the job. And she kind of put aside her kind of qualms about it. But then, one day she came upon, some names on the list, and she's like, well, these people actually are described as Americans. Their nationality is American, and they're journalists. We're actually spying on American reporters here. And, that was like too much for her to swallow. I think that she went on the record in this case because she felt like this was a story that was already so complicated and so shrouded in mystery. And she really thought that, it required that type of exposure, that type of credibility that you get from actually having somebody who can speak with that sort of authority on it, and actually having like a face and a name to it. And, and I thought it was, a very brave thing for her to do.
Absolutely. Joe, we've got about 30 seconds. Tell me, is the FBI now investigating this? Was the law broken? Yeah. So the FBI is investigating whether the law was broken, whether indeed, this project known as Project Raven, whether they were involved in spying on Americans, and whether the American intel operatives were involved in leaking, classified information or classified methodology to foreign intelligence operatives. Joe Shuckman of Reuters, thank you so much. Great work. When we come back, our shout out for a reporter who went into the Deep South and gave a voice to high school students who wanted to know why they were treated so differently from the white students at the high school up the road. And tonight, a shout out for a reporter whose investigation into the white-black disparity of two high schools in Louisiana gave voice to the students who are getting the short end of the educational stick and got the attention of the federal judge overseeing the school district.
The mold, the carpet, the walls itself, the classrooms, the teachers, everything that you need in the school or could use in the school is not there.
Reporter Dan Lieberman with the online media outlet NowThis went to Catahoula Parish in Louisiana to Block High School, where most of the students are African American.
To see why students are speaking out and what conditions in Deep South schools are like more than 6 decades after desegregation.
We saw a local news piece from rural Louisiana about these kids who were protesting conditions at their high school.
We got teachers that are not certified teaching subjects that they don't even know.
If you're a teacher and you don't know what you're doing, how you expect me to do?
I talked with Lieberman at the NowThis studios in New York. Were the kids afraid to speak out? Were they afraid they might be punished by the school?
They were surprised to see that someone from out of town, out of state, was showing up to really put a spotlight on these issues. They weren't sure it was going to make much of a difference because they really felt like in this parish, in this state, their voices didn't matter and they weren't going to get a change.
What made the story so powerful is what Lieberman then discovered nearby.
But 13 miles away, there's another school in the same school district that looks a lot different. Nearly 90% of the senior class here is white. They perform better academically and enroll in college at a higher rate.
It really did feel wrong. It felt like an injustice. This is one school district. The schools should not look that different. And there's been desegregation orders in place since the 1960s. And for, if you're in 11th and 12th grade, at one school, majority white, other school, majority black. You look at the conditions of the two high schools and you see that the funding doesn't add up. So we just tried to film inside Harrisonburg High School, but the superintendent won't let our cameras inside. They don't want the principals to talk to us on camera. But there's a clear, notable difference in how the school looks compared to Block High School.
But Lieberman was able to get the superintendent on camera.
When we talk to students and we talk to families at Block High School, they compare it to Harrisonburg. They say Harrisonburg has beautiful facilities. Why do you think they're saying there's such a difference?
Several of the other schools, communities have passed bond issues specifically around facility renovation and refurbishment, and in the recent years, Jonesville hasn't passed any such issue to address their schools.
Both high schools are in the same district, and Lieberman says he thinks there's more to it than bond issues after talking to one school board member.
So I asked the school board member, why don't you just consolidate the schools? And she said, the parents at that school, they don't want their kids going to school with those kids because of their moral character.
That's what she said?
Yeah.
Which was what, a code for?
It's a code for racism. It was so obvious. You feel it there, and it was wrong.
Lieberman's report had immediate impact. Federal Judge D. Drell, overseeing the long-delayed desegregation efforts in that school district, saw the NowThis report and ordered a hearing into what's going on. So essentially, he was unaware of this disparity until your report.
That's right.
So he gave you full credit for bringing this to his attention. Yeah. Neither the school board nor the Justice Department had done that.
He said that I'm so glad you came down to Louisiana.
Why do you think it took an outsider to go down there and to reveal this?
To me, I really think that it speaks to the broader crisis in journalism, where areas like this, in the Deep South, in rural areas, they're not getting asked tough questions. Reporters are not showing up there asking tough questions.
But now they will have to answer tough questions from a federal judge, Judge Drell, at a hearing scheduled for next month. So a shout out to reporter Dan Lieberman, who I'm proud to say began his professional career working with me as a young man at the ABC News investigative unit. He's continuing to make everyone so proud. That's our program for this week. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week. Good night.